Story time. So this was 2 years ago, and I was at school, and it was a normal day until the principal went on the speaker and said, "We're in lockdown, go in your closets." So we went ahead and went in the closets. We were all confused. Some people were scared. Everyone was like kind of asking the teacher what was going on and stuff. Now during this time, I wasn't asking anything or saying anything because I knew during a lockdown you don't want to say anything. So if there is someone in the school, they won't find where you are. But I was still listening to them because I was curious like everyone else. So while everyone was asking the questions, one girl stood up and said, "If you're not going to say what's going on, I'm going to get out of the closet." The teacher yelled at her and told her no. And the teacher yelled loud, so whoever was in the school obviously heard. So the door opened and everyone became silent. And so basically for part two, welcome to part two. Okay, so the guy that came into our school was a prisoner that escaped prison. So he was like, "Where are you?" And he stood in there for at least 10 minutes. Then we thought he left, but he was completely silent, and the teacher gave us a look saying, "Do not talk and do not move." So we all listened to the way he looked, and my best friend, the girl that stood up saying she would leave, got up and left. She thought that the guy was gone and she was going to get a counselor. So as soon as she got out of the room, we heard gunshots. As soon as the gunshots said that, I knew immediately what happened. I started crying and I thought that she was dead. The guy didn't even try to come in the room that we were in, even though he knew where we were. He immediately left knowing that he should have not shot the girl. Wait for part three. Welcome to part three. So as soon as the guy left, we got out of the closet and started panicking. We didn't know what to do since she was shot in the head and we knew that she wouldn't make it. So we were all freaking out, and so was I, and I was crying and I just couldn't breathe right and I didn't know what to do. The speaker went off saying that the police and the ambulance were coming since the principal heard a gunshot too. So when the police came, they found the guy who was hiding in a locker and he got contained and took into the police office. The ambulance were here and went in the room and took her. They said with their face saying she would not make it. That was the worst day of my life. So the ambulance took her, and about 2 days later, we weren't allowed to go to the school since the guy was still on the loose. He escaped. So we all had to stay at our homes, and I visited my friend, and I didn't know she died.
I'm going to be telling you the scary story of the house I lived in elementary and middle school. It was a 3-bedroom house, 1 bedroom in the basement, and 2 bedrooms upstairs. Because I was the oldest, I got put in the bedroom in the basement. Right when we moved in, I already had creepy feelings about the house. I hated being downstairs by myself. One day I dropped a $20 bill behind my dresser. I decided to move my dresser all by myself, and behind the dresser was this door. It wasn't a normal door, it was really short and just squared. It was also glued off, so I couldn't get into it. Me and my neighbor, who were best friends, worked at it for days to get into it. We finally got it open, and inside was another room. It was almost like an underground attic. The walls were wooden, the ceiling was wooden, there was no carpet, but it smelled awful. My parents found out and they were super mad at me for opening the room. They of course put that dresser in front of that door for a reason because they knew I would explore it. But after that, things started to get weird. Stay tuned for part 2. This is part 2 of my scary childhood story about the door behind my dresser. Of course, my parents were really mad at us for opening it up, so they sealed it back up. They just didn't want us to get hurt from all the rusty nails or if there was mold inside. But I think we released something when we opened that door and a lot of things started to happen. First, I started having night terrors to the point where I would scream at the top of my lungs and not wake up. My parents would have to come downstairs and wake me up and put me back to bed. Then, every single night I would have this reoccurring dream that me, my mom, and my brother were all at a picnic at the beach. This super old lady would walk up to us and she would take me. She then would lock me up in the room behind my dresser. This dream would reoccur every single night for months. It scared me so much that I started to not sleep at night. I developed insomnia and would only sleep for 2 to 3 hours per night at only 8 years old. There was a couple nights where I swear I saw the old lady standing in the corner of my room. My parents just thought I was hallucinating from no sleep though. Stay tuned for part 3. This is part 3 of my scary childhood story about the door behind my dresser. Because I wasn't sleeping and developed insomnia, my parents took me to a sleep therapist. The only thing the therapist gave me was a bunch of sleeping pills. Even though the sleeping pills worked, it made my dreams so much worse. I even started walking in my sleep. I would wake up all the time not in my bed. My covers would be all the way across the room like someone had dragged them over there. One night, one of my best friends slept over and we heard knocking coming from the door behind my dresser. That night when we went to bed, she started speaking really creepy gibberish in her sleep. I had to go get my mom to wake her up. I woke up a couple nights feeling like I was suffocating, and when I swung out of bed, I saw a silhouette of an old lady. My cat even started to sit there and meow and hiss at random things in the corners of the room. But there was nothing ever there. It got so bad to the point where I moved up into my brother's room. On my scary childhood stories. After my dad remarried, we moved into a blue house, and me and my stepsister shared a room. Right when we moved in, I already knew something was off about that house. It was just kind of creepy. I got weird vibes from it. Nothing really happened within the first couple months of living there until winter hit. Keep in mind, this was like during when I was 14 and 15. Me and my stepsister's room was right below the attic, and at night we used to hear footsteps up there. These weren't footsteps coming from an animal, they were more footsteps coming from heavy boots hitting the ground. I told my dad about it, and so he had an exterminator come over and check it out. When the exterminator came, he found no animals up there and no holes in which animals could get through. But that didn't stop the footsteps every single night. My dad didn't want me and my sister going up there, so one day when he was gone, we went up there by ourselves and found some really creepy things. Stay tuned for part 2. This is part 2 of the attic series. After the exterminator came and found no animals or places where animals could get into, me and my stepsister decided to go up into the attic after my dad had left. When we went up there, it was filthy. The first thing that we noticed were hangers, and they were hanging clothes and belts from the ceiling. The weird thing is the clothing didn't look that gross, and it looked like it hadn't been up there for very long. The energy up there just felt very intense, and we wanted to get out of there right away. The footsteps didn't stop after the exterminator came or after we went up there. We believe after we went up there, we made the spirit angry because weird things started to happen. The lights in the hallway used to turn on and off all the time, even though no one was upstairs because my parents lived downstairs. There'd be footsteps in the hallway, and when we would check, no one would be there. I can't fit everything in 60 seconds, so stay tuned for part 3. The first story starts when I was 2. I don't remember it much, but my parents have told me this multiple times. We lived in this little white house. It was very old. My parents used to always hear me laughing and playing in my room with someone, but there was no one in my room. When they asked who I was talking to, I told them it was a little boy named Omar. They thought it was just an imaginary friend, but now that I think back on it, when I was 3 and 4, I did see someone. He was always very kind to me. I would play Barbies, and he would play with me. He would draw me pictures. I would leave my books out for him so he could read while I was at preschool. I would tell him about my days, and he would tell me about his. But things started to get really weird once my brother was born, and that is when my parents started to see him too. They believe that this is because he wanted to be the only little boy in the house. Stay tuned for part 2. Here is part 2 of the series of the little boy. When my brother was born, my parents used to sense and see the little boy as well. My mom used to feel his energy sitting in the rocking chair. My brother's mechanical toys used to just start making noise. He started to show up less and less in my room, and every time he would, he kind of scared me. He wasn't himself anymore. He was mad, angry, everything. My parents believe it's just because he wanted to be seen and he was lonely, and now that I had a little brother, I wasn't paying as much attention to the little boy. My mom would wake up to my brother crying in the middle of the night and go check on him, and she would sense something standing next to her. Weeks later, we moved out of that house due to a shooting in our backyard. My old nanny, who lived across the street, told us after we moved out, she would always see something in the window of my room.